just in case. It's cool. So hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming to this WEAll Citizens' first actually ever member-led working group initiative. I'm really excited to be here today with Rucker and the UN University to help launch the practical doing in order to move beyond GDP. So just a quick background into what we're doing here. So Rucker wrote a book, Moving Beyond GDP by 2030, and then continued this effort in a short briefing paper that we all published called Measuring Wellbeing, How to Move Beyond GDP. And then he hosted 2 webinars with us, one where he reviewed just like the basics of the paper, and then the other one was deep diving into all the different indicators that exist and sort of comparing them against the other. And then from this, we came together with the UN University and decided, like, let's actually try to see what we can do to move beyond GDP and do the work. And that's what brings us here today, to solve this very vast, entrenched, brilliant, and complex puzzle. So without further ado, let me pass over to Rutger to launch the program. And then if you also, and if you decide that this isn't necessarily for you, we do have a group on our citizens platform where we'll keep you all appraised of the happenings of the project. So there we go, Rutger.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks for being here. In the next hour or so, I just want to tell you what we had planned. It is actually quite a new way of collecting beyond GDP data. You know, usually what happens, and I've done this quite a lot, is that a researcher will think of a beyond GDP metric or topic, and then they'll go ahead and start measuring it and then publish it somewhere in a database. So I don't actually know whether this has been done before. So I think we are experimenting to a certain extent. So I hope to introduce the project in the way that we've thought of structuring it. Let me just share my screen. Isabel, could you just say whether you're seeing the screen?
I can see your screen. Yep, all set.
Great. And you're not seeing the the pictures, right? Okay, yeah. Great. Okay. Unfortunately, my colleague Case, who is also actually part of this UN University project, is not here at the moment, but we'll be doing a lot of this work together. And we used to work together at the Statistics Netherlands for a very long time. And so what exactly will be different, and what do we hope also that is the benefit to yourself in collaborating in this thing? What we want to do is create quite a unique database where we're creating kind of a portal for a lot of the beyond GDP approaches that are out there. You know, currently, if you want to go Human Development Index, if you're interested in that, you can go to the UNDP website. You can download a lot of data there. If you want subjective well-being, you can go to Gallup or to a World Happiness Database. If you want ecological footprint, you can go to the Footprint Network. So there is actually loads of data, but what there isn't is kind of a portal where you can find all of this data. So if you want to compare, for example, you know, subjective well-being and the Human Development Index, then that would take you actually quite a bit of time. And so what we're going to do is actually try and combine all these data that are out there. And by doing so, I think we will be making it easier for journalists, for scientists, and also for MSc students, for example, that want to do research in this field, to actually start more quickly rather than having to collect data from all different sources. Now, the novel aspect of this is that it's kind of a way of crowdsourcing research and data collection. I don't actually know whether this has been done in the beyond GDP space before, but citizen science is definitely something that is increasing a lot. And I guess the nice thing about it is that we'll be learning together about the various things. I think the knowledge of the group will be, I think, also the interesting aspect to it. And you will, of course, also have access to the data. you know, people are free to use the data as we collect it. And of course, you know, there'll be acknowledgement also in the project literature and stuff of your participation. Now, there is a certain philosophical aspect to the project. So, what are the you know what is the background really of the project? Well, firstly, we're not dogmatic in the sense that we're going to be choosing one beyond GDP indicator or the other. So sometimes you'll get the feeling that you know, some person will have a favorite, like the ecological footprint or some other measure. In our case, we are not dogmatic in the sense of which beyond GDP approaches we will be tackling. At the same time, we will be critical. I think basically, I would say that, you know, there's wonderful work being done, but you know, in all wonderful work, they are never perfect, and I think it is also good to be critical. And of course, this is kind of an experiment. The UNU said it's a good idea. Perhaps it's nice to involve citizens and researchers in this process. But it is an experiment. You know, will the data quality be good enough? Will there be enough knowledge in our group to actually get this done? So it is an experiment, and I guess we will be making mistakes along the way as well. And so just before I delve into the database that we're envisioning in the project, basically the timeline, so that you also kind of understand what, if you would like to commit, what you would be committing to. So the first is that today we have this kickoff. And if you look at the very end, you know, we would like to have some version of the database up by the summer. And so we're hoping to have kind of 2 intermediate meetings where we share experiences, you know, see what we've been able to collect, and really, you know, really talk about the database. And I think this is also, you know, something that you probably need to think about. You know, would you like to be part of the core team? Then it's probably good to be at all 4 meetings. But you know, the core team will also be the ones that will be doing quite a bit of the work. You know, collecting data and looking at certain issues. Or are you perhaps just interested in the database and you know, interested in hearing its introduction today, and then at the very end would also like to hear what the results are? Of course, I'm hoping very much that, you know, people join the core team as much as possible, but I do think, you know, if we're going to make this a success, then the people in the core team probably will, you know, that'll also require you know, putting in you know, a number of hours in each of these tasks. So for today, I'm going to just describe the project in 3 very simple steps. First, I want to tell you a little bit about the bigger project that this is part of, which is called the United Nations University WEAll Transformation Initiative. Then I want to tell you a little bit about the WEAll database, and then you know, how are we going to collaborate together? And there might be a couple of things missing from that, what we'll be discussing today. I won't give you a full breakdown of the project, so in the next meetings, I hope to tell you some more about the whole project. And I think it would also be good, once we have our core team installed, you know, that we get to know each other and our motivations and those kind of things. And I also think we'll have some more time to dwell on some more difficult issues, like, you know, should beyond GDP be a top-down process, a scientific process, or should it be a participatory process, or should it be a combination of those two? And also things like biases that exist in the current measurement systems in terms of gender, or in terms of the fact that it's very often geared towards the global north. So I do think, you know, in the following meetings that we'll have in April and May, we can also tackle some of the more, you know, fundamental problems, I think, or issues that are involved in creating such a database. So just one slide just to introduce you about the larger project that we're part of. So it's a UNU project, but together with UNITAR, which is another UN agency, Chatham House, and also the Technische Universität Dresden is part of our consortium. And basically our theory of change is that, you know, there's 5 important pillars to changing, you know, to this transformation. Important aspect is, of course, the acronym. WEAll stands for well-being, sustainability, and equity, which are the 3 core aspects of sustainable development, and its definition in the Brundtland report. And these 5 pillars that we have are narratives, language, statistics, models, and institutionalization. And I could talk about these 5 pillars for a long time, but of course, today we are definitely going to be focusing on the statistics. You know, what kind of beyond GDP statistics do we have? And so the database that we would like to create is actually contains 3 parts. So the first part is that we want to create a historical database which goes back to 1820 for 150 odd countries, and that'll be annual data. And why do we want to do this? Well, if you're looking at kind of the long-term trends of, you know, our addiction to fossil fuels, for example, or the long-term developments in well-being, education, health, then it usually is very good to take a very long-term perspective about the transformations that have been taking place in society. And this will actually be doing in collaboration with the University of Eindhoven, who has a very good department on historical statistics. The second aspect of the database is the contemporary database. And here we want to basically create data from 1990 on an annual basis for, again, 150 to 200 countries. And we have 3 separate aspects to the database. So there are the indices, such as the Human Development Indicator, Ecological Footprint, Gini coefficient. Then there are the thematic databases where on health, education, climate change. And third, there are dashboards such as donut economics, SDGs. So dashboards of indicators. And the final one is that we want to create a fast database. And this is because of the criticism that quite often beyond GDP is really, really slow. So, you know, we might be able to measure all sorts of stuff, but it usually is really, really slow. And in this project, we actually want to see whether we can create monthly indicators for important variables in beyond GDP. Isabel, I don't actually see the chat when I'm going along. So, and I could imagine that already there are questions or people want a clarification on certain things. So I don't want it to be too much of a presentation where I don't get very much feedback. So if you have any query or any clarification, please just either unmute yourself or maybe just add it to the chat, and Isabel can screen the chats. Yeah, are there already some questions or some comments?
We don't have questions in the chat, but maybe if you want to stop sharing your screen so everyone can see each other, then we can sort of have a conversation about it. Does that sound good? Okay.
A couple of others have also come in later. I hope everybody managed to get the gist.
I did record, so if you didn't,
Yeah.
we can touch base after. But yeah, does anyone have any questions? You can just unmute yourselves or do the little raise hand function in the reactions, like this thing.
I have a question in regards to kind of how this is going to look like. I have a hard time kind of figuring out what the end product will be. Will it be like kind of a big online database, like you see in OECD, for example, data where you can then just tick off whatever data you need and then you get it? Or is it kind of only a website where you just accumulate a lot of links that puts you in contact with the website of where the data is? Or
yeah, the next two slides were actually like end product.
Yeah.
So that's a great question, which we're leading up to. So that's a great one. But yeah, so maybe before we go there and I start sharing again, Marius, you had a question?
Yes, I have a question. My main question is, where does the initiative arise from? What is the purpose? If you accomplish this, what will you have accomplished?
Yeah, so the database, basically the argument, I think, is that we have loads of data, right? There's loads of beyond GDP data, and if you're knowledgeable, you can get there, right? So I think a lot of us might have been studying this for a long time, and we know where it is. But for example, when I speak to journalists, and they do really sometimes want to write about the well-being economy, it's very difficult for them actually to find the right data in a coherent fashion. So what I really hope actually that the end result of this would be that, for example, all the different initiatives that we have, such as the Human Development Index or the ecological footprint, that you could actually have them in one location, and that a journalist or a civilian or a scientist could really easily download the data that is already available. So in a sense, we're not doing that much which is new. I don't think it'll be that novel. I think the fast indicators will be novel, but the contemporary database, for example, exists, and it's more or less a portal that gives you access to all these data. Especially the journalists, I kind of get a lot of questions from journalists, and they're actually very willing to write about well-being economics, but you need to be quite an expert to know where all this data is. What does a Human Development Index exactly measure? What is the ecological footprint? So we want to make it easier to access all this data.
And just to support, real quick, just to support that. So at WEAll, I manage I get a lot of incoming queries of like, oh, I'm a student at this and such university. Do you have any report on such and such? Like, there's people that are coming to us looking for evidence, like why a well-being economy, how a well-being economy, where is the evidence that this is, a good idea. And I think this would support some of those queries as well.
Okay. Because that's normally my main indicator for successful work, is if the questions that Isabel just named are answered. Does this, because otherwise sometimes things get totally out of hand. What does it need to answer these questions? Is this the simplest and the most efficient way?
Yep.
Brian, I see your hands raised.
Yes, thanks, Isabel. I was wondering about the designation of the 150 to 200 countries that you're referring to. To what extent is that a historical, and is there some openness? I'm particularly thinking about Sierra Leone, and just kind of wondering whether that would be a country that was included.
Yeah, so for the UN, for who we are doing this project, this is really important that we don't make it a global north kind of project. I think, for example, the OECD is a fabulous database for the Better Life Index, but it's very much a rich countries database. And so for the UN, it's really, really important that we do our very, very best to also include the global south. And I think I think it is also very important when we're discussing this issue that we have, you know, equality in that sense. So so the 150 countries is something that, you know, from my own experience of collecting these data in previous projects, I think that's doable. I'm working with a project for the World Bank at the moment called the Changing Wealth of Nations, for example, and they, I think, have now 144 countries. So the exact number will need to, you know, in the end will be a practical matter as well. But we are striving to be as inclusive as possible to making this a global database. And I think also for WEAll, I don't know, Isabel may be able to speak to this, but you know, to a certain extent, WEAll itself is already also, you know, quite focused currently, I think, in terms of membership in the Western world and the developed world. And sometimes it's good to also realize, just like you said, Sierra Leone, or other African countries or Asian countries or Latin American countries, it is important to take that perspective on board as well. So while the data is poor, often very poor in those areas, we are definitely going to make an effort to make it as big as possible.
Hi, good morning. I'm sorry,
Good morning.
My video is not working well, but
Okay.
I have a question. So I was curious about your definition of well-being and the indicators of well-being that you are seeking to collect data for.
Yeah.
Because as you know, the definition of well-being in the well-to-do countries is very different from poorer countries that may need to include, you know, the situation on inclusion, right? Racial inclusion and other types of injustices, or other, you know, lack of access of water, for example, or their capacity to participate in processes where decisions are made, right? At the global, back their own countries, et cetera. So I'm just curious about, how do you think about well-being and the indicators for that reflect the experiences of other nations that are not wealthy? Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think that's going to be one of the most crucial aspects of the database in the long term, because, you know, a lot of the work that's being done now, as I said, is quite Western centric. So, for example, subjective well-being measurement, life satisfaction is generally something that is done in a lot of Western countries. The Human Development Index, for example, is based on the work by Sen, for example. So I do think that has a lot more in common with development frameworks. But one of the challenges that we have is that there are a lot of many different philosophies and cultures, and sometimes even indigenous knowledge that across the world, which have a very different perspective of this well-being. And so it is a specific aim of the project in general, actually, that these type of these type of things do come into the project. But then the question then also does become, how does that translate into, for example, statistics or models? And I personally don't actually have an answer to that yet. The only thing I can say is that it's quite important to us to add those perspectives, and then to try and see whether we can develop those. But I don't yet have an answer, and I think that's actually part of the process, that we keep on board that the ideas of well-being may be very different across the world.
Just as a last comment, so you might consider reaching out to scientists that come from those communities.
Yeah.
You know, that may have database that is not part of the, you know, the large scale database, but they may have it in their closet, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know. So,
yeah, we're actually going to be hosting a different workshop in June at the UN University, and it'll be specifically about not just well-being, but even sustainability. Quite often has a different connotation in different cultures, and so that session will be a workshop specifically looking at how sustainability is different in various cultures and philosophies, really. At the same time, I do want to say that, it's good to have kind of the overall discussion. And at the same time, I don't think it should stop us from getting data out there to people that are want to move this agenda forward. Sometimes it's good to have kind of a long-term discussion and a long-term development strategy, but also to get stuff out for the people that are requesting it now, because I think there's a huge willingness to kind of move beyond GDP, and where there is a gap, I think we need to service that that data gap.
Thank you.
Marius, did I see you raise
Yeah,
your
yeah,
hand?
yeah.
Okay.
Two questions. Statistics are very easily inclined to some kind of harmonizing, drive of harmonizing everything, which in my view, the question that came up, first question is, would you be happy if the end result would be that there are cultural diverse things, that well-being, 4 types of well-being, etc., and the African one is different from the Asian one, or the Western one, or the Japanese one, or whatever. Because when you do this statistic thing, it has to be all in this framework. Second question, you said something about the UN university or something. I don't know officially how this is connected to the UN, but well-being on a UN level is like almost, I think we would say, Neanderthaler developments. They have one SDG, good health and well-being. And if you look at the indicators at the backside of this SDG 3, there are 26, 25 are on health. Probably you know this, and there's only one on well-being. And that's actually the suicide rate in the country. So the implication is basically that someone doesn't feel well when they die and there's no virus or something, but there's no medical reason. This is like last century thinking about well-being. For me, something would be a success if this indicator thing gets a little bit updated. So let's say 26 indicators and 12 about well-being and 14 about health. That would be an interesting endeavor. So is this an implication of the project? Is the UN in any way involved in and specifically this well-being thing that's mentioned in SDG 3? Is this connected to UN university, or?
The nice thing about it, so UN processes can sometimes be a bit political, so to speak. And one of the nice things about the UN university is that there is a certain degree of freedom to create a space there. At the same time, I must say, Marius, there's so much you can quibble or you can find important, and you find this important in this space. There is so much to find important, and at some stage, I do have kind of an urgency that we need to get stuff out there, right? I mean, while in the longer term, this is the whole WISE transformation initiative is actually a 3 to 5 year process. So, for example, redesigning the SDGs in the 2030 is actually one of the things that we have been discussing. But on the short term, I think we should do our best to kind of try and overcome some of so we need to identify the real core issues and debate those, but at the same time, it shouldn't be an impediment to getting the data to the people that need it and can use it to influence either from a scientific, journalistic, or a civilian perspective.
Yeah, the last thing.
And the same is the debate about harmonization and whether it should be individual. I think in a very extreme sense, you could say 7 billion people on this planet each have a different conception of well-being. And on the other extreme, you could say all people are equal, right? We all have equal DNA. And I think actually the truth is a little bit more in the middle, that we have things, loads of things in common in terms of a common humanity, and we have loads of differences about, what we prefer. And it's actually trying to find, I think, the common humanity thread as much as possible, but also leaving a lot of room for divergence in terms of individual needs or cultural needs. So it's these are the things you're raising are enduring debates in our community, but and I think they are important, but I don't think it should be it should stop us from getting data out, basically.
Thanks.
Maybe it's good if I just proceed towards what Alexander was talking about, the what will it be look like, and what use also might it have for you at that stage and for the audience. Let's see. Isabel, you are seeing it? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are 3 separate databases, and I think it's good to see where where you might contribute. Wait, why is it not proceeding? Yes, and I did want to say, so in the summer we are going to be publishing a database, a version 0, as I said, but it will of course depend a little bit on the progress that we make in this project to see what exactly we can actually add to the database. So I just want to show you, for example, what the contemporary database might look like, and then specifically the index version. So what I'm envisaging is that for these 3 dimensions, well-being, sustainability, and equity, that we collect the indexes that already exist at this moment. So in the case of well-being, that might be subjective well-being measurements, so life satisfaction measurements, the Human Development Index, maybe the Better Life Index, if that exists for the global estimates, and then to also collect those data for these 150 countries. And I'd like to do that for sustainability as well. So indexes such as ecological footprint, comprehensive wealth or inclusive wealth, planetary boundaries. Those are all examples of sustainability indexes. And the third one is equity. And there are also a couple of global coefficients that are there. And so what I would actually really like is that if people came to the website and they clicked on this version, then they would immediately, either for the global situation or for their country situation, be able to see the development of these indicators in these various spaces. I've kind of reproduced the same graph for all 6 of these situations, but you can imagine that if you click on Austria, for example, then you would get these graphs for these various indicators in one location, and you could download the data really easily. Similarly, sometimes you might want to make comparisons of certain themes, which is the second contemporary database. So, for example, you want to have data on health differences between countries, educational differences, differences in climate change emissions. Then you would also get access to these data in a really quick way. You could download the data really quickly. And basically, it's up to the user to see, what aspects they want to focus on. And so what I've just been discussing is just just 2A and 2B in this table. But this is kind of the visual aspect that I hope now for Alexander, it's a bit more clear in terms of what we want to achieve. and this is not at the moment available, which is a bit surprising to me. There is a great paper by Ida Kubizevsky, who actually did do a lot of this data collection a couple of years ago, but then, you know, it's an academic paper and there's no database which is constantly being updated for these kind of aspects. So I'm kind of hoping that is now kind of clear. So what the end results would look like. And so I do want to now proceed towards the you know, the way that we will be working, hopefully. So it's what I'm going to be doing is just quickly going through the 7 steps of the data collection and the things that we want to achieve, and then we'll also be going through it visually. So we have. Oh yeah, sure.
One more question came into the chat. So
yeah.
Will it be possible to layer the different graphs for comparison's purpose?
Yes, yes. You know, this the visualization I gave is a very clunky one, but of course, you know, where possible, comparisons between countries, or, you know, selecting certain indicators, or those kind of things, we're really hoping that we can get that done, of course. Yes, so don't trust the rather clunky nature of my visualization. So the 7 steps that we'd like to take with the core team that will be working on this is that we'll be working on a Google Drive for the data collection process. And to the right, you'll see a you know, the data structure there, or the file structure which is there. So you see the presentation that we're having today. You see 2 template files, and you see a tasks file. And in a moment, we'll be going to that Google Drive, and I'll show you the various files. And so the second aspect is that in the tasks file, that is the one that we'll be coordinating our work in. And you'll see that you can also sign up to various tasks. And it's good if you both want to do a certain task, then it's of course good to contact each other. Then there is the step of grabbing the template doc or the template XLS, because that's where you'll be doing the data work in. And so you rename the template according to a file name. Then you do the research, and then upload the data to the data subfolder. And one important thing, I think, you know, a communication mode that I think should adopt is that in the Slack channel that we have set up, and perhaps Isabel can put it in the chat. I think that is where we could actually interact about tasks, because it is, you know, the aim is that we learn together and that we interact. And so I think the Slack channel is actually a great place to ask questions or to query certain things. So we have this Google Drive and we have this Slack channel, which are basically the core places that will be working. And so now I actually want to just go to these different files and just show you them. And so I'll share the, let's see, this one. This is a bit small. I hope
on the top, look on the top, or like right underneath where it says, I can't read Dutch, I'm sorry, but you see like the print button, the paint button, and it says 100%, you can like, yep, right there.
Oh,
Yep.
right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah. So in the task file, so this Google Doc, which is there, you'll see the structure of the database on the left. So you'll see the historical database, the contemporary database, and the FAST database below. And then for each of those databases, there are various tasks or topics. So if you look, for example, at this line, there's the Human Development Index, for which, we'd like to collect some data. And then, apparently already somebody is in the Google, or probably it's Isabel. You can see her, you can see her example. And then you'll see that either there's a doc file or an XLS file. And basically the difference is that if there's a doc file, then there still needs to be a bit of research on that topic. But if there's an Excel file, then we're ready basically to collect the data and put it in a certain data format. And the idea is that actually you select one of the topics that you would like to do, or some of the research or data that you'd like to collect. You fill out your name, just like Isabel. She volunteered for the Human Development Index, and she put in her email address. And then basically you go to the template .doc or the template.xls, and then you proceed with that. And I've put some initial tips on where you might actually do some data work, where you might find some data. And I think it's also good if people, have other tips, please feel free to add those. So there's the historical database where work needs to be done. There's the indices, there's the themes, health, education. So there's loads of areas where either you're knowledgeable or you have knowledge of the database bases. I don't know whether there are fans, for example, of the donut economic model. One of the things that we want to add is also the donut data that is available across the world. And in terms of the FAST database, there are a couple of issues about open data, big data, for example, that we would like to further develop. And the final one is some issue papers where, there are some issues like, how could we add a participatory process to these indicators? How can you distill evidence and wishes from the general public? Do we have some, could we make some progress on how gender biases, for example, play a role in measurement of beyond GDP? Are there global north biases, so to speak? So, how does well-being, the discussion we just had, how is well-being in terms of, global definitions of well-being? Is there perhaps a bias towards the global north, and what can we learn from the global south? So there are many areas basically where we really need help. We are, of course, going to be doing a lot of this work ourselves at the UNU as well. But as I said, if there are people that are knowledgeable and willing and have time to help in this database, that is the real aim of the project. And so perhaps good just to have a couple of questions on this tasks thing before I then go to the templates Word file and the XLS file, because there we'll be going slightly deeper into what exactly we're looking for. Are there any questions about how to kind of navigate this, or how to choose this, or are there any pressing questions on this topic?
There's a question in the chat that says, might you consider the accessibility of data that may allow communities in its members to use for their own decision-making processes?
Yeah. Yeah, so the idea is that actually by creating databases like this, you are creating already a body of indicators, right? Things that they can use. But then I don't think from that point, I think you also need to be really clear that many cultures have their own priorities, their own things that would come out of a participatory process, for example. And so I think there always should be some flexibility, right? That in local communities or in countries, there is of course flexibility in terms of the actual indicators that you use, or perhaps add to these. I think New Zealand is a very good example of that, where they based their project on the OECD database, so the Better Life Index. But then when they developed it, they did add to that their own issues in terms of, for example, the Maori or child poverty, I think was very prominent in their indicator set. So in that sense, I always think there is a certain amount of indicators that are kind of universal, I would say. And then there are also, I think, indicators which are very specific to individual communities or even neighborhoods, or even within a family, I would say there are differences. So yes, the idea is that to make the overall indicators available, but it's not as if then that is the answer to each and everybody and each and every community in the world.
Thank you. Before Brian goes, I just want to note time. So we've got 13 minutes, and I think we have a bit to cover, but we try to end on time. So Brian, if you've got a question, go ahead.
Yes, thanks again, Isabel. I was just in the process of posting the question to the chat. This morning, I'm having some issues with internet stability. And would very much like to access a recorded version of the Zoom session, if that will be possible. So I'm just kind of a little concerned about some of the links that have been shared and being, kind of securing those connections and kind of connection to the resources.
Yeah. We'll send a follow-up email with all the links to make sure that it's accessible, and then I'll share the link now to this task spreadsheet. And if you want an email from me, just make sure that your email is inputted, or from me or Rucker, but if you make sure your email is inputted on this sheet, I'll share it in the chat now.
Yeah, Brian, there is, so you can sign up in two ways, actually. So if you would like to kind of be part of this process of collecting the data, discussing it, being part of this core team, then please fill in your name in, one of the rows of the things that you could think you can contribute to. The other way of, keeping informed is to put your name in the interested column. So, if you're interested in the database, but perhaps don't have the time, or you don't feel that you can contribute, then but you still want to remain informed about how the database is progressing, then you could fill in your name in the interested location here below. And then, for example, when we're doing the launch of the database, then we'll be in contact with everybody that's interested. Now, of course, I hope we do have enough people to make, to do some of the tasks that are in here, and to make some progress there. But so there's basically two ways in which you can leave your, register your interest.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. Got it.
So it would be good to hear. I mean, are people interested in joining the core team, or are there still, would it be of interest to the people that are in the call at the moment to be part of this core team? And do you have any other questions on what that would entail, or perhaps it's good to just stop sharing the screen at the moment? Alex, yeah, or Alexander, sorry.
Exactly, yeah, Alex is also fine. So I'm just curious, what is it that is needed in kind of this template.doc form? Like, is it just about like summarizing what it is about and so on, and then just copy pasting all the data from the, like, I'm still not completely sure what kind of the tasks would be.
Yeah. So yeah, in the template files, you'll see that very basic information. So for example, if you were to do the health, for example, the health.doc, you know, it would ask some really simple questions about which health indicators are available globally, what are the URLs, what is the country coverage, you know, very basic things about those kind of data sources. And you know, if it is a doc file, then it's you know, it was my assessment that it's probably a bit early to really put it into a data sheet. And so if there is already enough data, then please go to the Excel file, and that's where we actually are already going to be uploading data. So there, for example, I know that there is a human development index database. We don't need to, you know, we can already collect that data. We don't need to research whether it's there or what the best HDI is. It's just there. And so in the case of an Excel file, then we are already going to be putting it into an Excel format.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
I think some of the data in the different scales are open and some not. I think the data that are at the core of the World Happiness Report are owned by Gallup, I think. So that would be a first thing, which are accessible and which are not, because that might already make a big divide.
Yep.
And maybe if some of the data are not available, then the graphs that you put in there could not get being produced on the fly.
Yeah.
The other thing is that even if the data bases are open, I think you would need like maybe some really experienced computer API specialists to make these accessible instead of really copying the data to a new platform. Just leave them where they are and connect them how they are open. But they're both questions that yeah, might be interesting to look at.
Oh yeah, yeah. One of the things in the issue papers is things like open data, because it's very inefficient to actually just you know, download data. But then it's also a matter of, you know, do we have an expert on open data in our group, and could they help us in that sense? Because we know about open data, but you know, would have to develop that knowledge. And I liked what you said about Gallup, that, you know, that's precisely this type of knowledge that we can crowdsource, because you then know that Gallup is actually a paid database. And in that same sense, everybody here will have some kind of knowledge to add to this database. You know, and those are the kind of things that we'll need to know when we're creating this database, and maybe we'll then pay for that data through the UNU, but actually finding out what is paid data and what is not is the first step, of course. So, you know, that piece of information that you just gave us is by itself a valuable reason why you would want to crowdsource some of these, you know, this knowledge.
I did a contribution, wrote something for an open database project of the city of Amsterdam. I think if you
cool.
So if you want to know something, get in touch later. That was a book about all kinds of open database things, and there must probably be a technical guy in there who knows something about the back end of these systems.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of, there's a couple questions in the chat. And I think it seems like there are additional questions. So it might be worth, if we could do two things. One thing we could do is open up a Google Doc and share it with everyone, and people can input questions, and then Rutger, you can answer those questions. The other thing that we could do is agree that a week from today, same time, we'll host another session and maybe do like a 30-minute or whatever, how long, 30 minutes to an hour session where we can go into additional questions around this after this group has looked at the resources that I've just shared. Because it might take a second to sort of digest and then come back with a couple questions to then start the kickoff. What do you think about this?
I'd like to hear also the group. I think probably this was a bit too short and we haven't gone into the details, for example, of the, these templates, and it's probably too late to do that now. So yeah, I would be willing to, like, in a week or so, that we follow up on this, and that because it's probably, it's not sufficient. That's also my feeling at the moment, to kind of perhaps commit to the process yet, or to be exact on what exactly we're looking for. So, but if I don't know what the feeling is of people in the group, whether that would be a good way to move forward.
Yeah, for me, that would be a perfect suggestion that Isabel just did, because I'd be happy and interested to contribute. I just don't have it exactly clear what it is that I can and will contribute to it.
Yeah, okay.
I need to get all of your contact information if I'm going to send a follow-up email, because I don't have any of your contact information. So if you want to just, everyone that wants to receive an email, throw your email into the chat right now, or into a private message if you don't want to share with everyone, it's fine. And I will set up a Google Doc where you can input questions, and then I'll send a calendar invite. I'll coordinate with you, Rutger, and we can set up a next call in the next week or so.
Yep.
Does that sound good?
Yeah, I see in the chat there's also already a lot of and perhaps also proactively, to make sure that I prepare for the next one. If you have a look at the docs and the just have a look at the Google Docs, and please also send me some questions beforehand to my email address, so that I can prepare basically also more of the questions that you have, so that I get a better indication of what you would need in terms of information. And maybe have a look at the tasks. If you have a question about a certain task, I think everybody probably has some kind of expertise or some kind of interest. So also, if you have a question, well, what exactly do you mean by that task? And I'm kind of interested, but I'm not really sure about it. Please just also send me an email, just a private email, or actually, let's not do that. Let's put it on the Slack. Let's start the conversation there, and then everybody can see also the response. So let's use the Slack to communicate as well.
Just so that we're also clear in terms of terms, it's not Slack.
Sorry.
Well, it's. I mean, Slack. We could use Slack. Like, we could use Slack, or we could use the Citizens platform.
Oh, sorry, the Citizens platform.
Yeah. So they're different. But let me just, in the last 2 minutes, this is what it's going to look like. Okay. So you all go on to weallcitizens.org, and you go over here to groups. You create an account, go over to groups. It's going to be right here, moving beyond GDP. And you'll see some things from me here. Okay. And you can ask questions in the forum section. Okay. And you could say, we're getting someone entering the room. How do you XXX save? And then, you'll have it here, and then everyone can write, and then you can reply to those comments. You can upvote. And this is a really easy way to manage This is a very quick introduction. I know we're running out of time at this moment, but I think you probably all heard about this through the Citizens platform. Where are you all? So I'm assuming that everyone here probably does have an account. If you don't, I'm going to also put my email into the chat. Please send me an email if you have any questions. And I know that Florian, you've just joined. This is the tail end of the session. But I will, if you want to, Florian, put your email in the chat. Ooh, we're having other people join. Time zone problems. I will send a follow-up email with all of this instruction with a Google, with access to the Citizens account. And yes, and then anything else, Rutger, you and I should probably chat after this as well, but yes.
Yeah, I think also it's probably good for, perhaps because of the time zone issues, some people are coming in late. So maybe it's good that we just keep the others that are coming in now up to date, and we just briefly just tell them what happened, perhaps. And so, and for the others, I think that would be a great process if you could, join the Citizens platform and ask any questions that you have there, and then we'll have a meeting of the hopefully the group next week.
Perfect. And I'll put this recording on the Citizens platform as well, so that you all can watch it again if need.
Okay. Thanks, everybody, and nice to have the discussion, and hopefully see you all next week.
And for those that just joined, so first of all, thank you everyone. And for those that just joined, we can stay on for a couple seconds.
Yeah.
Bedankt en tot ziens.
Yeah, doei. So Satu and Florian joined. Yeah, was there did it say in your I think in the calendar